education, and a good deal of it's laid at the leadership in school systems, and that leadership is accused of turning over quite rapidly, of not being committed, not being thoughtful about the process of educating young people, and are generally disparaged and said to either not be adequate to the task, a new task of educating people at high levels, or should move over for non-traditional candidates who knew nothing about education. That's not an editorial comment. That's just an observation. And do not create the sort of bed and foundation from which improvement can outlast the particular leader. And we see the constant, what Rick Hess calls policy churn, time and time again as leadership turns over. This evening, we have two individuals with us who have not had that kind of leadership in their superintendency. Both are superintendents of large urban areas. Sometimes Boston and San Francisco are seen as sister cities. I've been to both. Nothing could be farther from the truth. But both are in systems of approximately 60,000 students. Both have known troubles in the recent past, and both have had consistent and strong leadership over a period of years. The mythology is that urban superintendents last approximately 2.5 years, and then they leave, and someone else comes, and then they leave in 2.5 years, and nothing much gets done, which is particularly critical in the time of standards-based reform. The individuals that we have tonight, I've asked to address the issue of not only their longevity, but how you think about sustaining an educational agenda over a period of time, how you think about gathering support for that agenda, how do you measure your success, how do you admit your failures, how do you regroup and move an agenda forward. The Council of Great City Schools, of which both districts are a member, has done profiles of the growth of urban districts over a period of time and talk about stability and leadership both at the superintendent's level and at the board level, having a particular vision and a plan for implementation, and having a system of accountability. These are found in districts that have been making progress, and I think we'll hear tonight some of the progress these districts have made and some of the tasks and issues that remain. Both of our guests are graduates of Hugsy. Tom, back in the days of administrative careers program. I can't remember the year, Tom. I apologize, but 1968. I think I have a picture of you storming John Harvard in the yard, but I may be wrong during that period of time. Tom went on to an internship in New Orleans Public Schools, and from there went on to a series of superintendencies that included Oklahoma City, Eugene, Oregon, San Diego, and ultimately Boston. And in there, somewhere, found time to be Assistant Secretary for secondary, elementary and secondary education in the Clinton administration. Has been a friend of the ed school since his return to this area. Tom is a Massachusetts native, and for my program, the Urban Superintendents Program, has mentored 6 students over the 10 years he's been here. So I thank him for that, but also been a great friend of the ed schools and allow us to do a lot of things here. I'm not quite old enough to be Tom's advisor, but I was Arlene's advisor. Arlene graduated from Hugsy in the Urban Superintendents Program. She's been Chief Academic Officer in Seattle, Superintendent of the Washington, D.C. Public Schools, and is currently the Superintendent of the San Francisco Public Schools, and has also been a mentor to many students, both here at Hugsy and from the Kennedy School and from around the university, as has Tom. So both have been not only great graduates and representatives of the university, but have also given back to the university. I've asked each to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. Tom will go first, Arlene second, and then we will open up to your questions. So please welcome our guests, starting with Tom.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Oh, it is the evening. This is going to be tough. That's why I'm going to wander around a bit. I'm going to have to learn how to do my own PowerPoints here pretty soon. So you're not getting a PowerPoint tonight. But I will tell you what, if you're interested in what I've got as an outline, it's a document that you don't get an opportunity to, as an urban superintendent, produce very often, because normally you're not aware with very much notice that you're leaving. Either somebody asks you to leave or somebody asks you to come elsewhere, and in either case it can be anywhere from a day to 60 or 90 days and you're gone. And so for me, this has been an unusual experience of knowing and announcing a year ahead of time that I'm leaving the superintendency as of June 30. Fascinating thing has been a lot of conversation about issues of sustainability and change, reflection on the last 10 years, what has worked, what has not. And the short answer is that my successor will not have to start over, but there's still going to be plenty of challenges and plenty of work to be done. And this little document, it should be on our website, is called Transforming Boston Schools, a Decade of Focus on Children and the Challenges of the Future. So if I were doing a PowerPoint, I could put these things on the slide. You don't have to worry about that, and you can go to the website and find this if you want a reference point. I know that some of you are quite familiar with Boston and the Boston Public Schools and know a good bit about them. But for those of you who may not, let me start with just a little bit of context. We're a school system of 59,000 students. We peaked at 64,000 5 or 6 years ago. In Massachusetts, many of you know, charters for charter schools are issued by the state. There's no in-district charter possibility in Massachusetts other than a hybrid called a Horace Mann charter, and there aren't many of those around. And about 4,200 students have left Boston Public Schools to go to charters that are issued by the state. So that's part of the decline, although demographically the new group of students coming along is smaller than the one that is exiting the high schools now. So it's a combination of moving out to charter schools and lower birth rates coming up. We have about 46% black population, 31% Hispanic, 9% Asian, 15% white. The free and reduced price lunch count is 75%. That's understated by high school students, as many of you know, so it's actually higher than that. And the overall average for elementary schools and middle schools would be higher than the 75%. We have about 4,500 teachers, 13 bargaining units. The largest is the Boston Teachers Union that represents both classroom teachers and paraprofessionals. We have a operating budget of about $700 million. Have 145 schools. That's a large number for a district of 59 or 60,000 students, but we have very intentionally over the last several years broken up a lot of our big comprehensive high schools into schools with small learning communities within them, or schools that now house autonomous small schools that have their own school leaders, their own budget, their own staff, their own schedule. They're like condos in a condo unit. They share the building. And then we have 19 pilot schools, which would be similar to in-district charters in other places, where they have virtually all of the same autonomies that a charter school would have, but they are located in the district. They're the result of an agreement between the Boston Teachers Union and the Boston School Committee. And we've got 19 of them now, and we've successfully, after a long negotiation of more than 18 months, got an agreement that will allow us to expand by 7 more over the next 3 years. So that's a little bit of the context. I want to talk about several of the elements and then go into the work. Governance structure is very important when you think about any school district, but I would argue particularly so in urban school districts. And many of you know that Boston has a governance structure where the mayor appoints the school committee. And when I use the term school committee, for those of you who are from elsewhere, it's the same as a school board. It is the policy body. It's a 7-member board, 4-year terms staggered, appointed by the mayor, where there's a nominating committee that reviews the applications and interviews those who have applied and then recommends to the mayor more candidates than there are slots so that he will have some choice and the mayor appoints. But the superintendent in the setting here also serves on the mayor's cabinet, and then the 13-member elected city council has the responsibility for appropriating money. So you spend a lot less time, in my experience, with an appointed board than you do with an elected one. In my other 4 superintendencies, I've had elected boards. But being on the mayor's cabinet and doing a lot with the mayor and then having to go to the city council that likes to take on educational issues that they don't have any jurisdiction over because they believe that an appointed board doesn't respond to constituents as well as an elected one, because of the obvious point that people on elected bodies have to get reelected and pay a lot of attention to constituent services. Doesn't mean that appointed school boards and school committees won't or can't, but that's part of the dynamic. So in total, I spend more time among the 3, mayor, school committee, city council, than I would in a typical urban school district like San Diego or Oklahoma City for working for an elected board. A little bit about the organization. One of the things that I believe very strongly is that there's got to be a strong understanding that the 2 most important variables that the schools have for impacting student achievement are the quality of instruction and the quality of leadership. And one of the things that I did initially, which makes no sense organizationally, but symbolically it was huge and important, was I moved out the middle level of administration and said all of the principals were going to report directly to me. Now, that was 125 at that time. And then Janice Jackson, who got a doctorate here, went through the 2nd cohort of the urban superintendents, interned with me in San Diego, came with me to Washington to be my deputy in the Department of Education, and then came here. She and I, for the first 18 months, really were the 2 people that worked directly with the principals. In terms of the organizational structure, I felt it was important on a leadership team to have principals represented. So we created clusters of schools, each with a dozen or 15, and have a sitting principal, some elementary, some middle, some high, who are cluster leaders, not as evaluators of principals in their cluster, but as conveners and support people and, I suppose in the vernacular of the day, even sometimes coaches of their colleagues. But they convene them, and then every 2 weeks we have an expanded leadership team, and 9 cluster leaders are part of that 2-hour meeting with the senior leadership from my office. The other thing I want to say for those of you who are not particularly familiar with Boston is that we have a choice plan for student assignment. I won't go into the whole history of that, but at this stage, the elementary schools and the middle schools and the K-8 schools are divided into 3 zones: North Zone, East Zone, and West Zone. And if you live in a zone, you have about 27 or 28 elementary schools to pick from, and several K-8s, and 4 or 5 middle schools. At the high school level, all of our schools are citywide and choice. And some schools are more chosen than others, so there is an element in this in terms of where the computer assigns you to a place in the queue to review your choices that can affect where you ultimately end up. But it is a choice system, and that's important. Back to 1995. I was appointed in August, and actually I tried something that I learned in Washington, and I convinced Bob Peterkin, who was here and I had known for a long time, to chair a transition team. And he agreed to do that in August, September, and October, probably has always wished he had not, and helped pull together a group of people, from parents to some people in the school system to some community leaders, to really lay out for me the whole range of issues and to give me some advice on how that group thought I should proceed. And it was very, very valuable indeed. I would fly up from Washington on the weekends and meet with them and then go back and finish up my work at the Department of Education. And by a week before I arrived to take on the work full time, that transition plan was in place. I was interested in the Boston position because I believe that, particularly in urban America, there will be systems of schools, or there will be school systems around for a long, long time. Well, we have about 10% of the schools in the country, and that may be high, that are charter schools now. I don't see charter schools as a reform strategy that will affect American education for lots of kids, and that in urban school districts there will still be a very, very high percentage of kids who are in what we've known traditionally as school systems or school districts. And I think the challenge is to learn how to take a whole system of schools and improve all of the schools and not have the result of any particular leader's tenure be a few more good schools. And that's the only way we're going to get the scale in terms of meeting what is a very broad array of needs of the children in urban America. So I came in with two thoughts in mind. One, that was the challenge in Boston, and two, I brought a standards-based framework with me. Have clear expectations for what students should learn, have a curriculum that would give teachers and students access to rigorous content and the kind of instruction that would enable students to learn and apply what they had learned from that curriculum. The recognition that the most valuable resource, if you look at budgets and how money is spent, close to 80% of most urban school districts' budget is in people, professional development, support, training and development, so that the people who are doing the work that are going to provide the instruction will have the kind of support and be able to improve in the way they need to. And then an assessment system that would be formative in nature in terms of giving data along the way, as well as summative data for accountability purposes. So that's the framework. The first thing was to create citywide learning standards connected to the emerging, at that time in the middle 90s, curriculum frameworks in the main curriculum areas that the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, was producing. And then that evolved into a real full-court press for the first 6 months I was here, not to reinvent learning standards in each of the subjects, but to go to some of the work that had already been done, to put a draft of them together in each of the four key areas, math, science, social studies, and English language arts the first year, vet them in the community, but on a fast track, get the school committee to approve them, which they did in June and July of 1996, and to implement in September of 96. And simultaneously working on the first 5-year plan, which was focused on Children 1. And the intentional decision not to try to do all of the curriculum areas simultaneously in terms of intensive work. The standards would be there, but in terms of the curriculum and the professional development, to focus initially on literacy. and recognizing that, particularly at the elementary school, if you try to do too many things all at the same time, nothing really happens because elementary teachers have to do it all in terms of curriculum. My lesson learned, hindsight, I wouldn't have taken as long to jumpstart the literacy work as I did because our strategy was a 4-year rollout with the schools that were most ready to step up and use a balanced literacy model, readers and writers workshop, do the professional development, and then a second cohort and a third cohort and a fourth cohort of schools. And there were too many choices. We gave people 3 or 4 different choices within the balanced literacy model. The problem was it should have been a no-brainer for me, but I didn't really get it then because I'd done the top-down on the standards. I wanted to do more bottom-up with the selection of the curriculum, and the assumption was that because it was bottom-up, it had to be good. But guess what? The capacity variation from school to school was so great, and there wasn't the same level of capacity in terms of people having what they needed to know to be able to make intelligent choices about what their kids needed and what would be the best fit for them. This is the ongoing tension between the degree to which you manage instruction and do it from top down, and to what extent, as people will tell you, you've got to get buy-in of people. You can say it's going to happen from the top down, and unless they buy in and get the support they need, they won't implement, and particularly implement with fidelity. So, right direction, learn from it, didn't make the same mistake with math, but took a little bit longer to get to math, and then when we got there, we went with a district-wide curriculum, used Turk investigations at elementary, and connected math at the high school, at the middle school, and math connections at the high school, and had to make some changes at the high school along the way because the curriculum didn't really fit with the state standards in the same way that the elementary and middle school curriculum has. A huge capacity issue with respect to the mathematics program. It was the right thing to do in terms of getting a program that really focused on the need for students not just to be able to do mathematical operations and to understand which algorithm to use in a particular situation, but to get some underlying understanding of the mathematics. And for elementary teachers, many of whom had not had that kind of mathematics support, middle school teachers as well, we had to put a lot of time and energy and money into just content-based kind of instruction. The good news was that the workshop instruction, that pedagogy, was very compatible with the pedagogy from Turk investigations and connected math. So much of Focus on Children 1 was that focus on getting the literacy and the math work going, getting the accountability in place, and then 5 years in, we did Focus on Children 2. And when you take a look at this, you'll see more detail. I'm just highlighting a few of the things. And along the way, what was huge was that it really came out of the work with our initial coaching strategy and the literacy work. And the coaching strategy evolved over time. And one of the smart things that we did is we got, through the Boston Plan for Excellence, our public education fund, some of their dollars went into doing some evaluation work where Education Matters and Barbara Neufeld were able to really look at, through their qualitative research, what was going on with the literacy work, the evolution of the coaching work over time, and how we needed to learn what wasn't working from what they had observed, and in fact tried to respond in many instances to what we needed to learn, and that created a new step with respect to the evolution of the various models. So whereas coaching started out with coaches being hired who basically went into classrooms and worked with individual teachers and did a few school-wide staff development programs, it then evolved into looking at student work by scheduling common planning time, having teachers come together with writing samples from their students, deciding on a rubric against which to judge the quality of the writing, and then beginning to have conversations about how they got to the point where they recognize what level 3, level 4, level 2, level 1 work was, and then getting to the big wall that they hit when they had to recognize that in their common planning group of 5 or 6 or 4 people, that there might be 1 or 2 people, same kids across the classrooms, but 1 or 2 people that were getting level 1 and 2 work and others who were getting lots of level 3 and some level 4 work. And when do you then reflect, uh-oh, maybe this is about my own practice, and maybe I need to start talking with my colleague about what he or she is doing next door or down the hall, and could we begin to share ideas about the practice, or could you come in and help me with a couple of kids that I can't connect with? And then that evolved into our collaborative coaching and learning model, which has become the focus of our site-based professional development, where there are cycles of CCL that go 6 to 8 weeks, and there's a framework for the model where it starts with looking at data and having a group of teachers in common planning time say, okay, the data is showing us this. We need to work on it. Let's pick this area. Maybe read an article or 2, have a study group around it, and then decide what some instructional strategies would be that are different from what have been used, that haven't been working, that might be breakthrough. Then having the coach lead with a demonstration lesson. Pre-conference, the group watches the coach, debriefs, and then the idea is that each of the others in that cycle will volunteer the next week and the next week to do the demo lesson. And that's huge in terms of trying to create a climate of trust and understanding that supports risk-taking. And 2 things had to happen. 1, we had to agree, and we did with the union, that none of the information, the observations, the conversation that occurred in those CCL cycles could be used for performance appraisal. And secondly, nobody would be forced to do a demo lesson. I still feel very strongly about the first piece. I think we need to put a little more pressure on people to do the demo lessons, but that's very, very tricky. The good news is that in many places they're doing them. In other places they're not. As you might guess, it was easier with elementary people initially, a little bit tougher with middle school, and the toughest of all at the high school. But that's teachers taking their practice public. And that's been huge in trying to create the kind of culture change within the district and within the schools. Is it institutionally embedded throughout the whole school district? No. Is it going on to some extent in virtually every school? Yes. Is it going on in some schools beyond the literacy work and math and a little bit in science and some of the other subjects? Yes. It's something, though, that we think we've got enough evidence on that if, like anything, it's done with fidelity of implementation, there seems to be some evidence that it really works. And it makes no difference whether you have a 25-year veteran, a 20, a 15, a 10, and 2 brand new teachers in the cycle together. They can learn from each other. My time's about up for now. We can get to a lot of other things in terms of questions. A lot done with data. Look on the website for our 6 essentials of whole school improvement if you're not familiar with them, because that's been critical to shaping our whole view of what a school improvement plan should address. Quality of instruction is the centerpiece. The other essentials are the use of data to understand what's working, what's not, with respect to curriculum and instruction, having a professional development plan at school level that really is driven by the first 2, the data, the instructional piece, recognizing that the principal shouldn't do it all. There should be shared leadership, and that means creating teacher leaders on an instructional leadership team that will help develop the whole school improvement plan, help the whole staff come together around it, and the school site council. One that may seem simple but is often a problem in school districts or schools, making sure that the resources are aligned in your budget to support your educational plan. So you spend on the things that are important. And this isn't last in terms of a pecking order. The instruction piece is key, and the other 5 around it is the schools can't do it alone. There has got to be a family and community engagement strategy where the school is working to engage families and the school community as partners in the work. And we now have the chart, if you've been in Boston Public Schools, that you'll see everywhere, which not only says what the essentials are, but what you would expect to see in classrooms. And the beginning of a very important piece, which needs to get better, my successor will work on that, I'm sure, is the central office accountability piece and the relationship between the central office and the schools. Most people in central offices today will now say we exist to serve the schools. But the schools don't always think that the central office exists to serve them in the way that they really need it. And we've done surveys of all of the principals this winter to get direct feedback on the teaching and learning side and the operations side. Final thing I will say is that in all of this thinking about systemic reform and creating a system of schools, all of these pieces, whether it's the 6 essentials or some of the other pieces that I've talked about, cannot be viewed as individual program areas or become either in the minds of people or in a real sense silos. They've all got to be connected. So the whole of this is greater than the sum of its parts. That's what systems thinking and systemic means. And you have to work very, very intentionally at that, or people think, well, I'm working on the professional development piece today. Oh, this is a curriculum assignment over here. We're creating curriculum. Or we're doing our coaching, and it's really hard work, whether you're a principal in a school with your instructional leadership team or a superintendent, to keep people thinking about the connections and how all of this ties together. We can talk more. It's doable.
Turn it over to Arlene.
Do you want this?
She has one.
Oh, she's got, okay.
Let's get turn it on.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Or is this just my teacher's voice? Teacher's voice. I need some help. I don't want you to. I can do this.
Mm-hmm. It's on.
It's on. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but he with a chuckle replied that maybe he couldn't, but he would be one who wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with a trace of a grin on his face if he worried he hit it. He started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. Somebody scoffed, "Oh, you'll never do that. At least no one ever has done it." But she took off her coat and she took off her hat, and the next thing we knew, she'd begun it. With a lift of her chin and a bit of a grin, without any doubting or quit it, she started to sing as she tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and she did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done, and there are thousands who will prophesy failure. There are thousands to point to you, one by one, all the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start to sing as you tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. That poem has inspired me by Edgar Guest since I was in the 8th grade where I learned it. But I don't take chances with reciting it without some reassurance here. But it's inspired me and it's motivated me throughout my life, because it appears that throughout my life there were always people to tell me that I couldn't do it, and I was always on this mission to prove that it could be done. And that's the way I went into public education, with that kind of determination and fortitude and passion. That's the way I went into the superintendency, and why I've stayed in urban education for so long because I actually believe that it has to be done in public schools, that our public schools are actually the foundation for a strong democratic society. And we have no other choice. They have to work, and they have to work, and they're going to always serve the majority of our public. How many of you went to public schools?
I always ask. Nice. Okay.
Okay. Is that better? Okay, thanks. I asked that question because the majority of people went to public schools or attended at some point in their lives, and that's what's going to happen in the future. It's not going away. I don't care how many vouchers we put in place, programs, how many charter schools, the majority of young people are going to go into public schools. And my job, and those of us who are in education, is to make sure that every child has the opportunity to get a quality education from our public schools, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of their economic circumstances or the language that they speak. We are, in my job, and those of us who work in public schools, our job and our professional responsibility is to make sure that happens for everybody's children. So, who am I? Bob, my introduction was kind of short, I was thinking I've been doing this 38 years, and he only took 30 seconds. But I'm used to coming behind Tom, is the godfather of the superintendent. So, I'll take my 30 seconds worth. But there really is a long history there, 38 years, folks. And to those of you who say, oh, she's not gray, this red is covering up the gray, okay? It's there. I am a mother, and I never, I approached this job as I did every other job I've had in public education, a teacher, principal, central office administrator, superintendent, from the eyes of what does this look like to parents? What are they thinking? Because it's really important that I remember my role as a parent because I'm going to relate to parents in my work. I'm a teacher. I spent 15 years in a classroom. I never want to forget what it looks like as that door closes and the teacher is standing there with 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 kids. What does it look like to that person? And I always want to remember that. Let's see. I'm a learner. I'm forever learning, and learning is a lifelong process. Somebody asked me, what did I read? And I read a lot. I read a lot about certainly education, curriculum, and research, but I read a lot about leadership because when I'm in this role, I'm also leading, and I want to know what do other leaders think? What's the latest research on leadership, and what do I need to do better? I'm a risk taker, an advocate for children. I'm a doer. I've been a principal. I've been a lot of things in the public education system. That's who I think I am. Now, you can ask some other people, and they may not say that. They may say some other things, but they don't like me, okay? Those who like me will say that this is who Arlene is. I believe in what I'm doing. I'm passionate about what I'm doing. So in this session, and I wanted to start with who I am, because who I am is about what's important to me and how I'm going to lead and what happens and has happened under my leadership in wherever I have been, Seattle, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, St. Louis. It doesn't matter. These are things that are core to me, and it's who Arlene is. I don't change. This is the core. So the overview that you're going to see tonight will actually cover my little short version of the San Francisco story. And one of the things about not being a superintendent is you don't have this entourage of people who do things for you. So I'm learning how to do everything, not always well. But the first PowerPoint session you will see I did, okay? And I apologize if it's not fancy, but it's what I could do given the time that I had today. I decided at the last minute that I wanted to do PowerPoint for you. And so that first one is mine. I'm just apologizing before I start. I'll fix it up for the next group, okay? You're my guinea pigs. And then the second one is the Broad Prize overview of San Francisco. We were a Broad Prize winner last year, and that's already done. It's really pretty. And as well as a Broad Prize focus on our intervention programs, because one of the things that I'll tell you about San Francisco is that we are now the top performing large urban school district in California, and we have been for the last 2 years. We weren't 5 or 6 years ago, but we are now, and we're holding on to that spot. We were one of the Broad five Broad finalists last year with Tom, and Tom and I held hands. But what I say to people, Tom, is we came in second because anybody that didn't win came in second. So that's my thing. Oh, well, we came in runner-up. And so people think we all came in second, but we came in second with Boston and some other fine school districts. And we've had 5 consecutive years of improvement in student achievement for every group of students at every level. 5 years. That's kind of unheard of in large urban school systems. So I want to talk about how did we get there, and I want to talk about with you at the end maybe a few of the challenges I see ahead for San Francisco and maybe in the larger urban school context. So let's look at sustaining success and debunking the myth. This is the San Francisco Examiner, which is one of our newspapers, big newspapers there. This was August 10th, 2000, and I came in on August 1st. So imagine opening up your paper, and there you see this editorial. You know, this is what people thought. I couldn't pass a piece of paper around the community and get it back to me. That's how angry people were about the things that were going on in the district. And then the next slide. This is what it was last August. We soared to the top of the state's list. And then a few weeks ago, there were actually headlines that we were in the top third of all the school districts in California. And that's no small feat because there are thousands of school districts in California. So we've come a long way. The story is about excellence for all, an academic planning process that was strategic. People talk a lot about strategic plans, but it's usually not focused on the academic instructional piece. This was. And then what it included was all of the operational support as a part of a strategic academic plan. Usually you see it the other way around. And oh, by the way, let's talk about and plan for academics. We had 5 core beliefs, and I tell people this is really my 5 core beliefs, but I take them everywhere I go, and I start saying them, and then everybody else starts saying them with me. Here are our 5 core beliefs: that children come first, and whatever we do has to be in the best interest of the children. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but it's all focused on the children. And people say, well, that's simple, but I can't tell you how many conversations and how many times I find myself in meetings with adults talking about adult issues, and it drives me crazy. So my question is, tell me how this is in the best interest of children. And if people can't tell me, I'm not going to have a conversation with them for very long. So parents are our partners. Remember I said I'm a parent first, Anthony and Matthew, 30 and 33. Single young ladies. Well, one of them. One just got engaged. So one is, handsome, all of those things. But jobs. I'm shameless. I want grandchildren, okay? Parents are our partners. And I said that first because, that's what it's all about. And I have never in my 38 years met a parent, and I really mean this, who didn't want for his or her child what I wanted for my 2. Never. I may not understand their value system. I may not have their same lifestyle. But when I sit down and I talk to parents, they all want what I wanted for mine. So my job as superintendent, as principal, whatever role I've had, but as superintendent, is to give to other people's children what I'd want for my own. Now, I might make some mistakes, but it'll be mistakes from the heart, not because I didn't want to give them what other people mean. It won't be intentional mistakes. Victories in the classroom. I told you I was a teacher, and I never want to forget what it looks like when you close that door. What are teachers thinking about this initiative? Have they been involved in the initiative so that they have buy-in? Leadership and accountability are the keys to our success. I really believe that also, that no matter what role you play in public schools, if you're an adult, you have an opportunity to lead every day. I don't care if you're the bus driver, if you're the secretary, everybody must lead for us schools to be successful. And accountability was missing for a long time in education, 38 years. You've seen a lot come and go. And what I didn't see for a very long time was this accountability piece. So that's why we're running and we're scared. But, you know, it's probably part of our own doing. And so we have to be accountable for results. If I put my two sons in a school for a full year and they went to school and they were on time, I want a full year's growth. And if not, I want somebody to tell me why that didn't happen. And I don't want it at the end of the school year. So it's the way I approach the job and around accountability. And then I believe it takes the entire community to ensure the success of its public schools. We have to do what we have to do. But the school district, I mean, the larger community has a responsibility to be engaged in this process. Excellence for All was our strategic plan for 5 years, and they had 3 guiding principles: to increase student achievement for all students by raising the bar and closing the gap. And you know who's in the gap: African Americans at the bottom, Latino students, and then our ELL students. When I got there, our African American students actually were moving backwards, if you can even believe that. They were not only not maintaining, but they were the trend line was going this way. Ensure the equitable allocation of all our resources. If you want to see what's fair in a school system, look at how you allocate your resources. See where the resources are going. And for some of us who are fairly simple, just follow the money and you'll know. You'll see where the inequities are. The third one is to implement accountability for all. Of course, what we hear with No Child Left Behind and some of these other accountability systems is a focus on the student. And I believe when children fail, it's a systems problem, and it certainly is an adult problem. If a child gets to the 12th grade and can't pass an 8th grade exit exam, there is something wrong with the system. We shouldn't hold the child back. We shouldn't punish the child. Something should happen to the system. So it's important to me that everybody in the system is held accountable for doing their job well. So what did we do? The first thing I did was try to develop a sense of urgency in the community that we were always not well in San Francisco. Sure, there were some schools that were doing well, but they weren't even perfect. And that's what I said. There are no perfect schools in this school system, and every school needs to get better. We need to close this gap. We need to change and reverse this negative trend line with some of our ethnic groups. And we're going to talk about it, and we're going to put it out here for everybody to see. We changed central office, and Tom talked a bit about this, from a culture from one of restrictions and regulations saying no to people. I had secretaries and clerks saying no to principals. I'm like, what? My principals would tell me that's not going to happen. Only 2 people can tell you no, me or your immediate supervisor and assistant superintendent. Everybody else, their job is to find a way to get it done. And if we can't get it done, then we need to see if it's a systems problem that we can change. We did simple, symbolic things like change the hours of central office services. We went from people getting there at 6:30 and nobody's in the school at 6:30 and leaving at 3 to opening the central office at 7 and staying open to 6. That said to the teachers and principals, you don't have to leave your school. Your primary responsibility is at that school. We'll be here to serve you. Move decisions to the sites, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. We reduced central office spending, by millions. The first month or 2 I was there, we sent immediately $5 million back to the schools. And all I had to do was get on the elevator, walk around the central office, and I'd say, who is that person? Oh, she got sent down here because she can't do this, or he got sent down here because he messed up at a school. And I'm like, well, why is he down here? I didn't get this. What is he doing down here? If he messed up at the school or she messed up in her classroom, why aren't they at home? And why are we paying them a check? So we looked at, who are these people who are here? Are they essential? And if they're not, guess what? They're going back to a school, and evaluate them out. But they will not hide down here because the resources are needed in a school. We built a team of believers and doers. You got to do and you got to work when you're trying to change a system, and there's a sense of urgency. We became a standards-based curriculum. We held principals accountable for results. 50% of their evaluation. When I first got there, I listened to a lot of people, and I listened to a lot of principals who said to me, Arlene, these evaluations are terrible. They're qualitative, and, it's based on what somebody thinks, and we need to have something much more structured and objective. I'm like, good. We're going to make this really an objective process and for outcomes. So every school has performance-based criteria that we judge their success. So half of it, I'm going to tell you, is about looking at the test data and who's doing what and trying to close that gap. But the other half are other indicators like who goes into the advanced placement classes, who takes the test when they're there. It's one thing to open them up, but who's taking the test? So we're tracking them. And then what scores are they making? We looked at a variety of things, just dropout rates, attendance rates. So 50% is based on test data and the other is on other successful school indicators. But those indicators are there, and what we're saying is it's non-negotiable. It's based on 3 years of trend data. In June, we expect you to meet your targets, and if not, we want to know how we support you to get there early on. We moved authority and accountability to the school sites through a process of site-based decision-making. Greg. We all new initiatives were student-focused, and we engaged the public. We never took an initiative out, a reform initiative out, or implemented it without taking it to the community. And I don't mean one community meeting where everybody comes. We went to the various neighborhoods so that parents and community members could have an opportunity to talk with us about what they thought. With our Excellence for All, we had 3,000 parents come out to those community meetings and tell us about Excellence for All and what we should improve and what they wanted to see changed. We implemented the weighted student formula, and I know some of you have taken classes where you've looked at the San Francisco case, and that's simply a fiscal methodology model that puts monies where the kids are. So no matter where children go to school, the money follows them. And that gets rid of the sort of inequities that we see in terms of resource allocations around money. We provide a lot of support for underperforming schools. 5 years ago, there were 39 of those underperforming schools, and more than 92% now have made nothing but improvement, and about 10 or 15 really should have come off 2 years ago, but we're keeping them on because we don't want to take the resources from them, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that looks like a little later. And then we made sure the crooks went to jail. Remember we said that there were people stealing, and if you remember that editorial that said things were going on, we actually had people stealing from the district, and by sending them to jail, making a phone call to the FBI, actually we recouped $50 million. They went to jail, and the school system is a lot better off with them in jail. And probably your school systems are too, because they might be moving to where you live. What did we do, and what were some of the outcomes? We passed 2 consecutive bond measures. Remember I said we couldn't have passed anything in this school system when I first came. We passed 2, 3 years, just 3 years after I got there. And we passed 2 big bond measures, more than $600 million for facilities renovation, because again, when you start looking at equity issues, whether it's money or facilities, you'll see that there are problems. And that was a good case to take to the public, to say, you know what, it's not okay for these kids in this community to have to go to these schools. And it was more than $600 million, and $300 for facilities, and then $300 to put in counselors, nurses, social workers in schools, things that we sort of take for granted in some schools aren't there, art and music teachers. We did that with 71% of the voters saying yes, and we passed these bonds within 6 months of each other. So it was pretty incredible, but that's what people will do. Everybody wants to be on a winning team. Well, some people do. We were both finalists, and I shared the other 2 with you. Data over time, what does it say? And we want to compare it, let you see it, because I don't want you to believe me. Seeing is believing. I'm from Missouri, so you have to show me. I'm going to read another one of my favorite poems. I love poetry because often, like I said, it inspires me. So I'm going to read this one to you. This is another one of my favorites, and it's called Our Children Are Coming. Hurry, our bright and talented children are coming, arriving by the thousands each and every day, counting on you and counting on me to show them the way. Hurry, now hurry. Find families who will love them and provide the confidence to grow. Then they can take the risk and to learn all they need to know. Stock the shelves with books that tell them who they are, so they can dream that their success cannot be very far. Hurry, now hurry. Fix the schools so they expect all of our children to succeed. Recognition of their bright, creative minds is what they really need. Provide their care in environments that help them thrive, ones that show them that they can do more than just survive. Pull the curtains on the peddlers of drugs and tell them to go away. Let them know we will give the children what they need and we'll guide their way. Hurry, now hurry. Make sure the tables are set with food that is good for their soul, to make their bodies strong and ready to unfold. Change the minds of those who they will encounter so they look at all of our children with care, respecting them by playing the games with rules that are fair. Gather just enough worldly goods to satisfy their needs so they can keep their values focused on one another, sharing and doing kind deeds. Hurry, now hurry. Don't you understand? Our kids, all of our children, are reaching out and asking for our hands. Hurry, our bright and talented children are coming, arriving by the thousands each and every day, counting on you and counting on me to show them the way. Hurry, now hurry. Okay. Let's look at what the Broad, are you there? Okay. So what do we do? This is the degrees of intervention. We look at all schools. All schools have control over their budgets, and the budgets, though, are aligned with a very specific academic planning process. So our schools start with data. They look at that data. We give them performance targets, and then they develop plans to address the performance targets and the issues raised in the data. All schools go through that, and then they align that budget with those needs. Now, every school has a site council, and on that site council we have parents and teachers and other stakeholders. And so this is an inclusive process. The schools start at the beginning of the academic planning process with a school community meeting. The site council goes off and writes the plan with input based on data, based on the targets, and based on what people in the community said they wanted, the school community. They develop the plan. They have to take it back to the community to say this is what we came up with. So everybody is engaged in this academic planning process. And then they bring it to central office where cross-functional teams of people from various departments sit and review it. And they're only reviewing it for technical and regulatory issues. They're not making judgments about what the schools have decided. And if the schools do well, so what we decide is the more challenging the school, the more resources that we have to put in place. We have the weighted student formula down there with all of the schools. But then on top of that come other resources, Title I and other resources. Then we have STAR schools. And STAR schools are those 30-something schools that I talked about that weren't making progress. We decided one day, what's with those schools? Why aren't they making the kind of progress that we thought they would make? And, what we found is that they had common challenges. A lot of teachers, inexperienced teachers coming in and out. Many times they weren't credentialed, and they couldn't get subs. The kids were sick, no nurses. The teachers didn't have planning times. So, you keep low parent involvement. We had 3,000 volunteers in the school system, and they weren't going to those schools. So, my thing was, let's look at the challenges that these processes that these things that we can change. I can't change a person's family. I can't change that his mother is somewhere and his daddy is somewhere else, but I can change what's within this system. So in all of those schools, we put coaches for teachers, and these are instructional coaches that actually are in the classroom. I better not catch somebody out doing some kind of other kind of administrative work. That's not what they're there for. They're there to coach the teachers. They're there to model lessons. We put long-term, full-time subs in the schools, so they don't have to worry about getting a sub because the sub is there. We put nurses in those schools, social workers in those schools, parent liaisons, all of that to say we're removing all of the all of the challenges within the system that we can, so the teachers can focus on learning. And those schools have made incredible success. We also increase the monitoring. There are at least 4 walkthroughs in the course of a year that happens with our central office staff, giving feedback to these schools, and not just to the principals, it's with the academic team. So the teachers in the schools are actually hearing what's happening, and then they leave what they saw, not only the things that they saw that were negative, but here's one of the wonderful things that we saw, that you're doing great. It's almost time, I think, for me to shut up and sit down. Okay, and then there are the intensive STAR schools, and those are a few of them that just, again, we're making the kind of progress, and we increase the resources, we increase the monitoring. Homework packets go home with all of these with the students, and they're on grade level. You know, because one of the things I found in underperforming schools is that the parents just don't know. They like their school, but they don't know what good schools really look like. And once they have an opportunity to compare, boy, oh boy, the whole difference of what they expect. So we sent the homework packets on grade level so that the parents can see this is what your child should be doing now. And by the end of the school year, you want to see some progress. And then we have dream schools. Those are the last 9 of our schools that just didn't show progress, and those were reconstituted, and that's a whole nother discussion about me and fighting with the union on that. But so how does this work? We start with analyzing current conditions, develop an action plan and budget. It's reviewed with the district staff and modified. It's implemented and monitored and adjusted. And then at the end, we always evaluate results and effectiveness. All of our principals get to evaluate central office services. So guess what? The people in central office need those schools to succeed because their evaluations depend on what the principals say. And if you look at the STAR school program, that's really those are the things that we put on top of in the intensive STAR. You see there's increased walkthroughs, and there's 6 to 8 of those instead of just 4. And the dream schools, those are complete transformation of those schools. New teachers, new principals, community engagement, extended learning. They go to school on Saturdays and longer days, and enrichment opportunities, because you know what I see happen in underperforming schools? We think all we want to do is give more remediation. And what makes kids successful in great schools is they have all these other enrichment experiences. And so we said, you know what, guess what? We're not going to do that. We're going to give them these fantastic enrichment opportunities that they can bring out of school, that they can bring in school, and it builds on them. So we have these young people fencing, they're playing ice skating, and they're ice hockey. They're doing all those things that they never would have gotten, golf teams that they would never have had a chance to get because of their economic circumstances. And guess what? It's paying off in what happens in the classroom. They feel good about themselves. They like what's happening. So there were 2 other presentations on there, but you saw ours. I'm going to end with a poem, and this is truly one of my favorites, and it's by Marian Wright Edelman, and it's called Let Us Take Responsibility. Let us take responsibility for children who sneak popsicles before supper, who erase holes in math workbooks, and who can never find their shoes. And we must take responsibility for those children who stare at photographers from behind barbed wire, who can't bound down the street in a new pair of sneakers, who never counted potatoes, who are born in places we wouldn't be caught dead, who never go to the circus, and who live in an X-rated world. We must take responsibility for children who bring us sticky kisses and fistful of dandelions, who hug us in a hurry and forget their lunch money. And we must take responsibility for those children who never get dessert, who have no safe blanket to drag behind them, who watch their parents watch them die, who can't find any bread to steal, who don't have any rooms to clean up, whose pictures aren't on anybody's dresser, and whose monsters are real. Then we must take responsibility for children who spend all of their allowance before Tuesday, who throw tantrums in the grocery store and pick at their food, who like ghost stories, who shove dirty clothes under the bed and never rinse out the tub. Children who get visits from the tooth fairy and who don't like to be kissed in front of the carpool, who squirm in church or temple and scream in the phone, and whose tears we sometimes laugh at, and whose smiles can make us cry. But We must take responsibility for those children whose nightmares come in the daytime, who will eat anything, who have never seen a dentist, who aren't spoiled by anybody, who go to bed hungry and cry themselves to sleep, who live and move but have no being. We must take responsibility for all children, children who want to be carried, and for those who must, for those we never give up on, and for those who don't get a second chance, for those children we smother, and for those children who grab the hand of anybody kind enough to offer it. So I go in every day to work understanding that I have to take responsibility for all of the children, and it's why I love my job. As long as I'm working for children, I am happy. So thank you for being such a great audience, and we're going to, I guess, open it up for questions.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you, Tom. As I open it up to questions, I would like just to ask one question. You both have decided to leave the superintendency for a while, at least. And as people start to look for your successors, what would be, in one sentence, please, what would be, now you know why I gave you this sort of introduction? What would be your harshest critics' estimation of what the next superintendent needs to do as the top priority?
Oh, well, it's accelerate the rate of improvement to show annual significant improvement in closing the achievement gap.
Bob, I come from a family of 8 Baptist ministers. There's no way I can give a one-sentence answer. It's in my DNA. Okay. Oh my God, one thing. Probably right now what they're thinking about is a parcel tax to increase teacher pay. I'd like to see that parcel tax be differentiated pay rather than just one lump sum. I don't know if it's going to happen, but it needs to.
Thank you both. Questions?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I'm a master's student here. The question is for both of you, but it came up with something, Arlene, that you said in the second poem. The words "hurry" were mentioned a lot, and the more it was mentioned, the more it made me think of that tension between hurrying up and then the slow process of school reform. So I guess maybe if each of you could talk about how you balance that tension as a superintendent, as kind of the go-to person that everyone always looks to, especially the media, as we demonstrated.
Good question.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm viewed as an incrementalist by a lot of folks. And yet, one of the things I've started to do is to clean out some things and to be able to really reflect on questions like yours and be much more thoughtful about thinking about them for a while and looking back at some evidence that I forget about. If you looked at a lot of the newspaper articles along the way, which I've been kind of sorting and sifting, I wasn't viewed by an incrementalist by a lot of folks, which is probably pretty typical of what happens when you're trying to get things to change and improve in a big city school district. So the key is taking the particular context that you're in and pushing enough, as Arlene said, to get a sense of urgency and change that is going to lead to some discomfort and pushback, particularly in an era where there are so many special interest groups that you have to deal with. And if you please one, you're probably alienating another. And figure out how to balance that so that you do get some steady, continuous improvement. There are still folks that will say to the new superintendent that follows me what they said to me back in 1995, blow up the system and start over. The challenge in systemic reform is not to do what we've done with a lot of reform efforts in schools, particularly the high schools, is say we'll reconstitute a few schools. We'll find the best principal we can. We'll give him or her the opportunity to pick the staff. We'll even grow it. We'll start with a 9th grade, and then the second year at a 10th, and then an 11th, and a 12th. You can't change a whole system of schools without having a strategy for working with all of the people you've got. Because if it's going to be systemic, it's got to touch everybody. And that's where the strategies that may be very justifiable for a few schools, where dramatic intervention is necessary to get people's attention and get it moving, is a good first step, but it won't get you to systemic. And once you're talking about all of the people, it becomes steady, keep the pressure on, but much more incremental.
I agree with Tom, especially his last statement. The tension is really there. But I go back to what I said about being a mother first. What would I want a superintendent or a teacher or a principal doing if my child was in that school system? And I wouldn't want them to take forever to come up with a plan for change. I want things to happen while my child is going to be affected. So, I think the systems piece is really important. A lot has to go on, and it has to be an integrated system. But when people see that everybody's impacted by the change, and they're engaged in the process of reform, then you'd be surprised how quickly you can go. When I list all that stuff up there, sometimes I'm still amazed that this all happened within 5 years. So it can be done, but you have to engage people in the process. You have to help them understand what you're trying to do and why it's going to be better for them. The schools in my school system that were, on the API, which is the Academic Performance Index for California, they were okay. Some of them were really comfortable. They were 6s and 7s, and said, we're okay. Some of them were a few 8s and maybe 1 or 2 9s or 10s. They didn't care because everybody was focused on the schools that were at the 1 or 2 level. But when you focus on everybody, and every school has performance targets, many of those schools are now 9s and 10s. And it's saying that, no school is perfect, and you always ought to be getting better. And it is a systemic approach. I'm not going to just put the pressure on teachers and principals without putting the pressure on central office people to change too. I'm not going to say I expect you to make these changes and not give you support. So it is difficult, and there are probably some people who would probably say we went too fast. I don't know that they would say we went too fast. I think most people are happy with the progress we made. They may not have liked the way we went about it. Maybe they would have felt that there should have been a little bit more, community input. But I think 3,000 people responding, to an academic plan, again, is not something I've had happen to me in my experiences. But I just think you got to keep talking about it. You got to keep supporting it, and you got to let people know that what the changes mean, and that you're refining it and getting better. And, I say for those who are uncomfortable with it, then it is their problem.
I want to give you a good example. I bet we could have a conversation for the next 6 hours in this room, and there would be a division of opinion about whether having MCAS with high-stakes graduation requirements is a good idea. And we could have a wonderful philosophical conversation. But when you're a superintendent, you got to take a stand. And there's no mushy middle ground on that one. You're either for it or against it. And the state was split. The fascinating thing was that the urban superintendents hung in there around supporting MCAS and having it be high stakes, even though we all knew that our kids were often the furthest behind, needed the greatest amount of help and support if they were going to clear the bar, just to pass, let alone get the proficiency. However, the dynamic and the politics of that were very, very interesting as they played out, because the argument was the test is unfair. And then when we in the urban district started to hear the suburban folks taking the lead and saying it's unfair, and they were worried about a few kids in their district not passing, and what an embarrassment that would be. And then, oh, by the way, it wouldn't be fair to the cities. Well, then after a period of time, they formed an alliance with some black and Latino leaders in the city. And they joined together to try to get the state legislature to reconsider. And I went to a number of hearings where I was lambasted for supporting MCAS and how I didn't care about city kids and so on. And then some of the city kids were getting up there, and this is what absolutely killed me. They were saying, we can't do it. We can't do it. It was that self-fulfilling prophecy which went due south on a culture of achievement. Not to say that the educators didn't have a big responsibility for helping and supporting. And in 2001, when the class of 2003, as 10th graders, took the MCAS for the first time, only 40% of Boston Public School kids passed both English language arts and math. And everybody said train wreck in the next 2 years. The one good thing the state did was they gave us a lot of resources. We had about $5.5 million in extra resources to put in to real supports. And I will give the teachers union credit. They fought the high-stakes piece of MCAS, but when they saw it was there, those teachers got right with it and said, we're going to do everything we can to help our kids with after-school programs, with double blocks during the school day, with summer programs and so on. I would have been a little more upset about this if MCAS wasn't a reasonable test, because it has open response. It requires a student to read different kinds of text, be able to answer not only multiple choice questions, but do open response. You have to write a long composition. In the math, you've got to show your work in some of the problems and write about why you solved it in a particular way. And our goal is to get kids to graduate from high school with a diploma that will make them ready for continuing education of some kind. You've got to be able to do those kinds of things. Now, if it was a dumbed-down test with just fill in the bubbles and do test preparation, I would have had a different view. But that's the kind of thing. There's a lot of tension, a lot of friction, and yet in June of 2003, 78% of the class had passed. We had a summer program. We had a second graduation in November, and it was over 80%. Now, for us, that meant a lot of gap closing. And we had to accelerate the rate of improvement, which we did in just about every grade and every year that the state was making, because there was a big gap between the state and the urban districts. So that's the kind of thing where you really got to get in there and push real hard and decide that you're going to have enemies and you're going to have supporters, and you do what you think is right for kids.
Okay.
This question is for Arlene. In closing the achievement gap, which unfortunately implies that black students are at the bottom, how do you meet their needs without coming across as only being interested in the black agenda as being a black superintendent?
Mm-hmm. Well, because I'm there for all children, and having performance targets for all schools made everybody focus on everybody getting better. So schools couldn't compete with each other. They were competing against their trend data and their last best record. I don't worry about that. I mean, we don't ask that same question for a white superintendent. How is Tom, thinking about white kids? But we ask me, and I don't mean that to put down your question. I think it's important, but it shouldn't matter. I'm there to serve all children. And the children who are in the gap happen to be African American. And they happen to be Latino. And I sort of, have the analogy of an emergency room. If you go into an emergency room and you got some critical organs that are in trouble, you are going to the doctors are first going to work on those, and they're going to stabilize the other part. So that's the way I look at it. These are the children the most in need. I'm not going to take from other children to give to these children, but I am going to reallocate these resources. And we went from a central office that was 12% to 3%, and all of those resources went to schools. So people, I think understand that. I don't think they see me as a person with a black agenda in San Francisco. They see me with an agenda, and I think it's really important. But I always find it really interesting because as an African American female superintendent, people will ask me that, well, aren't you worried that people will think that you are? And there are some people who try to define me by that, but I don't let them do that. I am African American, and I'm happy to be, and I understand the struggle, and I understand what will happen to these young people if they don't get an education, what their future is going to look like. And people say, well, you know, when people argue with me about, well, you don't understand, you know, what kind of family they're from, or, you know, no, I don't. And that's none of my business. My business is what happens in that school, in the classroom. And if you're a teacher or principal, your business is too, to fix what you can do. And my job is to remove the barriers within the system so kids can get a good education. And so I don't worry about the things that I can't fix. I can't change, you know, Tom talked about the California, we have the California exit exam. You know, I didn't argue that. My board members, some of my board members wanted me to go out and be a real advocate for getting rid of it. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm spending my energies on the kids to make sure they're going to be able to pass the test. If that's what they have to do, I'm not going to spend my energies fighting a policy that I can't get changed. But I can change the outcomes for these young people. And so I think that that's the way I've approached it. You know, what can I change within my sphere of influence, and to go about that and not argue about things that are out of my control, and to see myself as a black woman, because that's what I am, but I'm also looking at this from the eyes of a parent, from the eyes of a teacher, from the eyes of, you know, a learner. So that's the way I approach the job, and I don't let people define, you know, who I am by terms of race or anything else. I'm comfortable in my own skin.
I just have a question, because you took a school system that was performing really low, and you know, a lot of times, even as me as a principal, I think of a school, of taking over a school that's performing really low, and it'd be easier maybe to get results with the school that's performing low, and you did a whole system-wide approach, and you made gains consistently for the past 5 years. So whoever comes in, I'm just wondering, do you think you might stagnate a little? Or is that, how are they going to sustain that growth for your way as your success?
Well, if they keep their eyes on the prize and they keep their eyes on the agenda, it doesn't have to. I do think that, you know, I mean, I was fairly controversial. You can tell by the way I present myself. I'm like, okay, this is where we're going. If you don't want me to lead, then, you know, don't put me in the leadership role. But I think there's a little bit of tension right now about, you know, how much role will the board play, because my goal was to keep as much of those political fights out of the schools and out of the way of the people who have to do the work inside the district. And so there is some around that, but I said to the people that I left, and all but one is, you know, are still there, don't forget why you're here. We've made this progress because we had a plan, we had a focus, we believe passionately, and so as much as those people will be allowed to do their work, they are committed to it. I was telling a story this afternoon that the new union president, I was lucky to have a very progressive union president at the beginning, so we got all of these things in place early on. But he came in and he didn't like the weighted student formula. And so he put out a little survey and said, okay, to the schools, would you like to continue with the weighted student formula? Would you like us to try and dismantle it? And it was an overwhelming no. Even though we're cutting, you know, we have in a cutting mode and we're in a fiscal crisis, we'd rather decide our own fate than have somebody downtown deciding that everybody will, you know, lose their librarian. So I think that if you embed the initiatives in the school, rooted in the classroom and in the class with the parents involved, it will survive me, it will survive the next superintendent, because the people who mean the most, these changes mean the most to feel a part of this. This is not Arlene Ackerman's reform. This is their reform. This is their dream school. Don't you dare touch it, you know. We've seen what good schools look like with poor children, and we want our schools to look the same.
Okay, and then
knowing that the most significant factor in student learning is the teacher in the classroom, and the level of effectiveness of that teacher, of course, is key. Did either of you, in looking at the equitable distribution of resources, did you take steps to make the distribution of effective, experienced teachers more equitable in your school systems? And if so, how did you do that?
Well, in states like California and Massachusetts, you don't do anything by taking steps without negotiating it. And so I mentioned I had 13 bargaining units. Having said that, a lot has changed because have been 3 contracts negotiated in the last 10 years, and we're on the 4th now. And trying to get rid of the seniority piece, which we have in terms of transfer, and to really have a much more intentional approach to recruiting, induction, and support to get contract language that would allow for provisional teachers in their first year to compete for their own position rather than be bumped out by a transferee from another place. This has helped a lot. The one interesting thing that is so context specific is that building attachment rights in Boston have been a huge thing traditionally. So you don't have lots of schools where you have veterans that have completely left and are primarily staffed by brand new, inexperienced teachers. We have some. And that's been an interesting counterforce if you don't try to screen that for quality, because you've got some veterans who are top-notch and are staying in schools that are real challenging. The other thing is, with this citywide choice, we've basically got the same cross-section of kids in every school in the city. And there are, the white population is so small that there may be 1 or 2 schools in the city that even have a 50% white population, and most are 20% or less. And same with Asian. But the black and Latino populations are large, and they're everywhere. So it's not as if you can flee. If you want to say, I don't want to teach those kids, except maybe with the argument of our 3 exam schools. And even they are much, much more diverse than they were 10 years ago.
Until December of this last year, 2005, we were under court order D-Say consent decree. And I actually used that consent decree to get a whole lot of things under the tent without negotiating, including protecting the under the star schools and the dream schools from getting teachers who go to those schools because they don't think anybody will notice that they aren't performing. And so I tried to use, as long as we had the courts on our side, as much as I could to put into the consent decree to protect the schools that needed protection the most. It'll be interesting to see what happens now that we have to negotiate those very things that we were able to do around teacher transfer and early recruitment for those schools. You know, some of the things we were able to do because they were schools that we targeted, the star schools, as needing these kinds of waivers from the union contract, and the judge just went along with it, you know, and let us do it. So they don't have that consent decree, and so it's going to be a lot harder. Like, we probably won't get any more dream schools or some of the other things that we were able to do because of the consent decree. But, you know, again, I was really lucky. The first 3 years, a lot of these major changes was done with a very progressive union leadership team, and they were right on with me. And this, you know, the last 2 years it's been really harder and harder to get some of these things in place. But I was lucky because I had the California, everything, Tom is right. But when you have a consent decree, you'd be surprised what you can use to leverage real change.
Let's take one more question, and then we're going to go David, and then we'll close up.
As new superintendents, either in San Francisco or in Boston, coming in, how did you balance best practice from your prior experiences, things that you believed in strongly, wanted to accomplish, with letting some of your strategy, plans, priorities emerge from the input you were seeking from the communities you were entering?
Well, I guess I would say that I came in with a much clearer sense of the standards-based framework when I arrived in Boston. I had done some of that in San Diego, but then I spent 2.5 years in Washington and had major responsibility for the reauthorization of the SEA in '94, which had a standards-based framework, which was the predecessor to one time removed from No Child Left Behind. So that clearly I brought in. But I also inherited a place that didn't have clear expectations. There were all kinds of different things going on in schools all around the district. So there was no district-wide standards or reference point in terms of getting it jump-started. And so that was easy for me to bring into this context, given what I was seeing in '95 based on my experience leaving San Diego and my 2.5 years in Washington.
And I don't know that I changed much. I may have changed the timing, the context changes because, you know, each city is different and you have to engage people. Maybe I spent a little longer on the weighted student formula. In San Francisco, we actually did a pilot the first year. In Washington, D.C., we just jumped in. In Seattle, we just jumped in. So you have to know the community. But, you know, if you have sort of a theory of action and how you think you're going to get there, that doesn't change very often in terms of the core. What changes is what happens in the context of the culture of that community. I just think what you believe and who you are, that doesn't change. You can try to window dress it, but you are who you are. And what your theory of action and what you know, the way you believe that you can get to good results didn't change for me. It just, I had to modify it, you know, depending upon the community and how ready they were for some of those changes. And D.C. was like truly hemorrhaging, so they were ready for anything that would bring about success, some kind of success.